The number I keep coming back to is 47 minutes. That's how long my sister's reception had been underway when her mother-in-law stood up, tapped her champagne flute with a silver spoon, and told a room of 200 people that my family had never been quite what Daniel deserved. 47 minutes. My parents sat at table 1 centerfront and they did not move. They did not stand. They did not speak. My father looked at his hands. My mother straightened her napkin. And I sat at the wedding party table across the room, watching them absorb it in silence, and I felt something click into place behind my sternum. The way a deadbolt sounds when it finally engages. I want to be very clear about something before I tell you the rest of this story. What Patricia Holt said into that microphone was not a slip. It was not whine. It was a verdict that she had been composing for 18 months, and she delivered it with the poise of someone who had rehearsed. My parents had stayed silent, but I had already prepared the file. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that silence has a cost. If stories about dignity, documentation, and consequences are the reason you're here, you're in exactly the right place. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. My name doesn't matter for this story, but my job does. I'm an estate planning paralegal, and I have been for 11 years. I work for a firm that handles high-net-worth probate disputes, the kind where families unravel over the contents of a safe deposit box, where a handwritten note dated 3 days before death changes the trajectory of 3 generations. I have sat in conference rooms and watched people learn in real time that what they were promised and what was legally binding were not the same thing. I measure everything in writing. I date everything. I keep copies. When I say I prepared the file, I mean I made a physical folder tabbed and labeled the way we prepare exhibits for a deposition. I started building it 8 months before the wedding. My sister Mara is 4 years younger than me. She is the kind of person who remembers every detail of every conversation she's ever had with you, who will show up at your door with soup when you're sick without you saying a word, who cried at her own engagement because she was overwhelmed by the idea that someone had chosen her so deliberately. She married Daniel Holt on a Saturday in September, in a garden venue outside the city, after a 2-year engagement during which his family had made it quietly, persistently, structurally clear that she was tolerated, not welcomed. Daniel is not a villain in this story. He's a man who loved my sister and was not strong enough at the time to hold the line against his mother. I've known the type. I've drafted wills for the type. I understand the type without excusing it. Patricia Holt is Daniel's mother. She is 63 years old, retired from a career in hospital administration, and she runs her family the way she used to run a department, through information control, selective escalation, and a smile that never quite reaches the eyes. She had decided, sometime around month 3 of Mara and Daniel's relationship, that my sister was pleasant enough but that the family she came from was not up to the specific standard she had in her mind. Our family is not wealthy. Our father worked in logistics for 30 years. Our mother was a bookkeeper. We grew up in a 3-bedroom house and we were not ashamed of it. But Patricia had a particular talent for making sure Mara felt the distance between their circumstances without ever saying anything that could be directly quoted. This is where the file began. It started at Christmas dinner, 14 months before the wedding. Mara had told me about a comment Patricia made at Thanksgiving. Something about the neighborhood our parents live in, framed as a concern about property values near the reception venue. I had made a mental note. I hadn't written it down yet. Christmas I was present. We were gathered at the Holt family home, a large colonial in the kind of suburb where the Christmas lights are white and evenly spaced, and Patricia was in the kitchen telling her sister-in-law about the wedding plans. I was refilling a glass of water near the pass-through. I don't think she knew I could hear her. She said, "Mara's lovely, truly she is. But her people are a little," and she paused for a word, and what she chose was, untested. Untested. I stood at the pass-through with my water glass and I recalibrated the entire scope of what we were dealing with. When I got home that night, I opened a new folder on my laptop and I started a document. I dated the entry. I wrote down the exact words. I noted the time, 7:42 p.m., and the witness, her sister-in-law, whose name I had gotten from Daniel months earlier. That document became the foundation of the file. Over the next 8 months I collected 17 text screenshots, forwarded to me by Mara when she finally started talking about what was happening, in which Patricia expressed concern about whether our parents would know how to conduct themselves at a formal reception. An email thread, which Mara had forwarded without realizing I would archive it, in which Patricia suggested that the seating chart place our parents at a table toward the back, near the buffet, so they're more comfortable. A voicemail Patricia left for Daniel, played on speakerphone by Mara, recorded by me on my own phone, in which she said, and I quote directly, "I just hope your children don't inherit her family's tendency toward," and then she caught herself and what she said instead was, informality. That voicemail is 7 seconds long, and it contains everything you need to know about Patricia Holt. And then there were the financial documents. Because 8 months before the wedding, my parents had taken out a personal loan to contribute $40,000 to the reception budget. $40,000. Signed on a Tuesday. From people Patricia had described as untested. I know the amount precisely because I was the one who drove my father to the bank. Mara didn't know the full scope of what I had. She knew I was protective of her. She didn't know about the folder. The week before the wedding, she called me at 11 p.m. She was crying, the kind of crying that happens when you've been holding it for months and something small finally breaks the seal. Patricia had sent a revised seating chart. Our parents had been moved to table 9. It was near the exit. I asked Mara one question. "Do you want me to handle this before or after?" She said she didn't want any conflict. I said, "Okay." I didn't tell her what I meant by that. I printed the voicemail transcription. I printed the email about the seating chart, the original one dated 4 months earlier, where Patricia had explained that our parents would be more comfortable near the buffet. I printed the Christmas dinner entry from my log. I printed the bank document, not the full loan agreement, just the signature page with the amount and the date. I put them in order. I labeled each tab. The folder sat on my desk for 6 days. The wedding was beautiful. I want to say that clearly and without qualification. Mara was radiant in a way that I don't have a word for. There is a specific light that comes from a person who has chosen and been chosen and knows it in their bones, and she had it. Daniel cried when she walked in, and it was real, and I noted that too, not in my file but somewhere quieter. I sat at the wedding party table and I watched my family arrive and find table 9 and sit down without complaint. My father was wearing the suit he'd bought for my college graduation 12 years ago. My mother had gotten her hair done. They sat with their backs straight and their smiles intact, and they did not say one word about the table assignment to anyone. 47 minutes into the reception, Patricia Holt stood up. She tapped her glass. The room went quiet. She talked about Daniel's childhood. She talked about the values she'd raised him with. She talked about the Holt family legacy. Their property in Vermont, the annual reunion, the tradition of excellence she had instilled in her children. She said she hoped Daniel and Mara would build something that honored that legacy. And then she said, with the specific precision of someone who has workshopped a sentence, "We know that Mara comes from different circumstances, and we are happy to welcome her into a life that perhaps she hasn't had the chance to experience before." 200 people. Different circumstances. My mother stopped smiling. My father looked at his hands. And the room did what rooms do when someone says something that everyone heard and no one wants to be the one to address. It went 3 seconds too quiet, and then it recovered and the applause was a fraction too thin. Mara's face did something I will not describe here because it belongs to her. Daniel did not stand up. I opened my clutch. I made sure the folder was still there. It was. If you have ever watched someone spend $40,000 and then sit at table 9 while the people who spent nothing stood at the microphone and gave a speech about legacy, you already know what kind of folder gets built when someone in the family works with documents for a living. Stay with me. This is where the file opens. 3 days after the wedding, Patricia called my mother. I know this because my mother called me immediately after, and I recorded that call. I am in a one-party consent state. I note this because it matters, in which my mother relayed the content of Patricia's message almost word for word. Patricia had called to say that she hoped there were no hard feelings about the toast. She said she had simply been honest about the transition Mara is making. She said she was sure my parents understood that it was meant with love. My mother told her it was fine. This is the part of the story where I need to explain something about my family that I understood long before I had the professional vocabulary for it. My parents absorbed. That was their primary emotional mechanism. They had been doing it their entire marriage, absorbing the judgments of people with more money, more status, more confidence, and they had raised 2 daughters inside that pattern without ever naming it. Mara had inherited it, at least in part. I had not. I had instead developed a secondary skill set: documentation. 2 weeks after the wedding, Mara called me. Patricia had begun referring to the wedding as a lovely start, a phrase she used repeatedly and specifically in conversations with Daniel's relatives, in a way that positioned it as the beginning of a project of elevation rather than the celebration of a marriage between 2 equal people. She had also, in a group family text, mentioned that she hoped Mara and Daniel's first home would be in a better school district than where Mara grew up. Mara forwarded me the screenshot. She said, "I don't know what to do." I said, "You don't have to do anything. Can I come over Saturday?" I brought the folder. I sat at Mara's kitchen table and I opened it, and I laid out each tab in order. The Christmas dinner entry, the email about the seating chart, the voicemail transcript, the bank document signature page, amount, date, and then at the end something Mara hadn't seen. A copy of an article I had pulled from a legal database about a concept called tortious interference with family relationships, which is a real legal theory used in estate disputes, and which I had not brought as a threat but as a reference point for a larger conversation. Mara sat across from me and she read every page. She didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "What is this for?" And I said, "I don't know yet, but I wanted you to know it exists." She looked at the bank document, the one with her parents' signatures, the $40,000, the date, and she pressed her palm flat against it for a moment, like she was taking its temperature. She said, "They never told me the amount." I said, "I know. What happened next was not my idea. I want to be precise about this." 3 months after the wedding, Daniel's father, Gerald Holt, a man I had always found fundamentally decent if chronically passive, called my parents. He called to apologize. He had been present at the wedding. He had not stood up during the toast either, but apparently it had been sitting with him. He told my father that what Patricia said was wrong. He told my father that he was sorry. He said he hadn't known until recently about the loan. Patricia had handled the budget negotiations and apparently hadn't mentioned the full breakdown to him. My father thanked him quietly and said he appreciated the call. He then called me and told me about it. He said, "I think it's over. I think it's done." I said, "I think so too." I did not tell him about the folder. I did not tell him what I had already set in motion 2 weeks earlier. Because 2 weeks before Gerald's call, I had done something very specific and very quiet. I had forwarded a copy of the file, not the full file, just the voicemail transcript, the email chain about the seating chart, and the bank document, to the director of a non-profit organization that Patricia Holt had been publicly associated with for 6 years. A non-profit that did community outreach work in underserved neighborhoods. A non-profit whose annual gala Patricia Holt co-chaired and whose donor newsletter had, 3 years running, featured her photograph and a quote about the importance of welcoming people from all backgrounds. I did not send an accusation. I sent a note. It said, in substance, "I am a family member of someone who has been associated with your organization through a board member. I have some material I thought your leadership might want to be aware of, given the public values your organization has stated. I am available to speak further if helpful." I included the voicemail transcript, the one where she stopped herself before finishing the sentence about what my sister's children might inherit. I included the email, the one about the buffet table. I did not include the bank document. That one was for later. 2 days after sending that note, I received a call from the nonprofit's executive director. I spoke with her for 40 minutes. I am not going to tell you the full outcome of that conversation because it involves parties who did not consent to this story. What I will tell you is this. Patricia Holt was not asked to co-chair the gala that year. She was thanked for her years of service. She was not removed publicly. She simply was not invited back. Patricia does not know why. She has theories, I imagine. She does not have documentation. The confrontation happened 5 months after the wedding, at the Holt family Thanksgiving. I was not originally going to attend. Mara asked me to come. She said she didn't want to be alone in that house, and I said yes the way you say yes to something you've already decided. I brought the folder. I left it in my car until I needed it. Dinner was its particular variety of strained, the kind of tension that everyone pretends isn't there while the gravy is being passed and that gets louder in the absence of sound. Patricia was warm to Mara in the careful way of someone who has received a quiet signal and is adjusting accordingly. Daniel was attentive. Gerald caught my eye once over the turkey and gave me a nod I couldn't fully read. After dinner in the living room, Patricia said she wanted to say something. She said she had been thinking about the wedding toast. She said she realized it might have come across the wrong way. She said she hoped my parents. She looked at me because my parents weren't there. She hoped they knew she had meant it with only the best intentions. And then she said, "I just want us all to start fresh. I think we should put the past in the past and focus on building something together." The room was waiting. I said, "I think that's a reasonable goal. Can I say something first?" I excused myself. I got the folder from my car. When I came back, I sat down across from Patricia. I set the folder on the coffee table. I did not open it yet. I said, "I work in estate law. Most of what I do involves what happens to a family when assumptions turn out not to be legally documented. Assumptions about what was agreed to, what was forgiven, what belongs to whom. I've seen it end families. I've also seen it clarify them." I opened the folder. I said, "This is a log I've kept since December of last year. Every entry is dated and time-stamped." I placed the Christmas dinner page on the table. "This is a record of a conversation you had with your sister-in-law at your own dinner table. You used the word untested to describe my family." I was 4 feet away. Patricia's expression did not change. Yet, I placed the email about the seating chart. "This is an email you sent to the venue coordinator in which you requested that my parents, the people who contributed $40,000 to this reception, be seated near the exit." I slid the bank document beside it. "This is the signature page of the personal loan my parents took out to make that contribution. The date is 8 months before the wedding. The amount is in the upper right corner." The room had gone very quiet. Patricia said, "I didn't know the specifics of the budget. Gerald handles." I said, "Gerald didn't know either." "I know. He told my father." I placed the voicemail transcript. "This is a partial transcript of a voicemail you left for Daniel on March 14th. You were expressing concern about what Mara's children might inherit from her family. You stopped yourself before finishing the sentence." I looked at her. "I have the original recording." Daniel was very still. Gerald had his hands folded on his knees. Patricia said, This is an ambush. This is completely." I said, "Your co-chair position at the Garden Gala." She stopped. I said, "I want to be clear that I did not call anyone. I sent documentation to a director and made myself available for questions. What they did with that information was their choice." She stood up. I said, "Please sit down. I'm almost done." She sat. "My parents have absorbed every comment, every table assignment, every careful implication for the entirety of their daughter's engagement and marriage. They will continue to absorb it because that is what they do. I am not my parents." I closed the folder. "I am not asking you to like us. I am not asking you to pretend. I am asking you to stop. Publicly, privately, at dinner, at galas, in text threads, in the language you use when you describe where Mara grew up. Stop," Gerald said. "She'll stop." He looked at his wife. "Patricia, you'll stop." Patricia looked at me for a long moment. Her expression had moved through several rooms and arrived somewhere I didn't have a word for. She said, "You recorded a private voicemail." I said, "Your son played it on speakerphone. I happened to have my phone in my hand." I picked up the folder. "I want to be clear about something else. This folder exists. Copies of it exist. Nothing in it will be used unless something in this room changes the calculation. I hope nothing does." I put the folder in my bag. I looked at Daniel. I said. Your wife is the best person I know. I hope you both have a very long and genuinely happy life. Then I looked at Patricia once more. And I said the thing I had been carrying since September. $40,000. Table 9. I just wanted the numbers to be in the same room. I left before the pie. In the parking lot before I started the car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. On the passenger seat was the one item I had not put on the coffee table. It was a letter. Not mine. It was written by my grandmother, my mother's mother, who died 4 years ago. She had written it the winter before she passed, to each of her grandchildren, in the careful cursive of someone who learned to write when writing was considered a serious skill. My letter had been about her experience coming to this country with nothing, about what it felt like to be called untested by people who had started on second base, about the specific exhaustion of being measured against a standard you were never told existed. She had written, "Do not make yourself small to fit in rooms that were not built for you. Bring your own measuring tape." I had placed that sentence at the front of the folder, behind the first tab, before any of the documentation. I had not read it at the confrontation. It didn't need to be read. But it had been present in the room. What happened, practically speaking? Patricia Holt did not attend the garden gala the following spring. She was thanked in the printed program as a former co-chair. She was not replaced, they simply restructured the committee. Daniel and Mara moved into their first house 8 months later. It is in a school district that my parents helped them research. Patricia expressed no opinion about the location. The $40,000 was not repaid. My parents did not expect repayment, and I did not pursue it. But at Christmas that year, Gerald Holt handed my father an envelope. Inside was a check. It was not for $40,000. It was for significantly more. The memo line read, "Belated and with apologies." My father tried to refuse it. Gerald said, "Please don't." My father kept it. Gerald Holt, for the record, is a man I have come to respect a great deal. He did not earn absolution at the Thanksgiving table. One nod and one check do not dissolve a marriage's worth of silence. But he is trying in the careful way of someone who understands that trying is what he has left to offer. Daniel is a better husband than he was a fiancé. I believe that without qualification. Patricia Holt sends Mara's children birthday cards every year. They are age-appropriate and warm and signed in full. I do not know what lives behind them. I don't need to. My parents do not know about the folder. They know that Patricia became quieter. My mother attributes it to age. My father has made no comment. I have not corrected either of them. The folder lives in a fireproof box in my closet, behind my tax returns. I have not opened it in 2 years. My grandmother's letter is not in the folder anymore. I had it framed. It hangs in the hallway of Mara's house, between a photo from her wedding day and a drawing her oldest daughter made of their family. Do not make yourself small to fit in rooms that were not built for you. Bring your own measuring tape. There is one more thing I did with the money Gerald gave, or rather, with the portion I helped my parents allocate because they asked my advice and I give it when asked. A third of it went into a college fund for Mara's children. Not the Holt Legacy Fund that Patricia had mentioned at Christmas 2 years prior. The one she had gestured toward as something Daniel's children might someday benefit from. A separate account. In my family's name. Opened the following Tuesday. My mother cried when the confirmation arrived in the mail. She didn't say why. I didn't ask. I understand what it means to sit at table 9 with your back straight and your smile intact while someone stands at the microphone and tells a room of 200 people exactly what they think you're worth. I also understand what it means to have already prepared the file. Justice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits in a folder on a coffee table. Sometimes it's a memo line on a check. Sometimes it's a sentence your grandmother wrote in cursive the winter before she died, hanging on a wall where her great-grandchildren will grow up reading it without ever knowing what it cost her to learn it was true. The room was not built for us. We brought our own measuring tape. If this story reminded you that the quietest people in the room are sometimes the ones who've been measuring the longest, that patience and documentation are not the same thing as surrender, then you're exactly the kind of person this channel was made for. Share it with someone who needs to hear that they are allowed to stop absorbing. Drop a comment with the word Table 9 if you made it to the end. I'll know you were here. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.